In Job 31:1, Job says, I have made a covenant with my eyes. But what does that covenant mean? First of all, a covenant is an agreement. And to make a covenant with his eyes, we have to read on in the rest of chapter 31 to get an idea of what he's talking about. So I want to read just the first two verses and then touch on a few other verses throughout the chapter, but I encourage you to read it for yourself, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then can I look at a young woman? For what portion would I have from God above, or what inheritance from the Almighty on high? So it's all about this agreement with God. He's saying, what portion would he have with God if he were to look on a woman with lust, basically? If he were to look impurely at a woman, because he's made this covenant with his eyes to look on the world the way God sees it and the way God intends for us to. So in this day and age, we have lots of things that draw our attention, that we shift our eyes to, whatever it may be, wherever it may be. It could be pornography as a temptation for the eyes to look at. Greed, things that we want to run after and covet because we see something better than what we have. And I want to just read a few verses from Job chapter 31 where he talks about the things that he looks at or that he sees. And then there's a lot more to it beyond that. But if we skip down to verse 7, it says, if my step has turned from the way, my heart has followed my eyes, or impurity has stained my hands. So if his heart follows his eyes to where when he sees something that he wants, then he runs after that instead of running after God. And here in Job 31, he's pleading his innocence to his friends. And he's saying, that's not me. I'm not running after the things I see and running away from God. In verse 19, he says, if I have seen anyone dying for lack of clothing, or a needy person without a cloak. And he's saying what he's done when he sees that is he meets that need. It's not something where he just looks away. He sees a person in need and tries to avoid eye contact or whatever it may be to not have to deal with that situation. He's stepping into that and seeing the needs around him and seeking to represent God to those in need by meeting their needs. Verse 21, if I ever cast my vote against a fatherless child when I saw that I had support in the city gate. It's this whole idea of if he can go against an orphan, a fatherless child in need, he wouldn't do that. Even if he sees that others support what he's doing, he's saying, I couldn't do that. I couldn't turn against this child in need just because others think it's okay. And then the last verse I want to look at in chapter 31 is if I have gazed at the sun when it was shining, or at the moon moving in splendor, so that my heart was secretly enticed and I threw them a kiss. And the whole idea is idolatry and making an idol of creation over the Creator. And there are lots of other examples of things in Job 31 where Job is just pleading his innocence. But what he's saying here is it's not because of my sin that this suffering has come on me. And really his friends have this idea of karma. You do something bad's going to happen to you. You do good is going to happen to you. And Job is saying, no, I've done the good. I've done all the good. I've looked at those in need and met them. I haven't looked at the virgin or the woman lustfully. I'm looking at this world with a worldview, with a perspective that God would want me to. And I'm seeking to do something about what I see. And his friends are saying, you must have done something wrong. And so their whole worldview is skewed. And Job's saying, no, my worldview is that I am following God and my suffering is not a result of my sin. It's a result of fallen creation, humanity. And like I said, he's not perfect. But I wish that I could look over my life and say, yeah, I haven't looked at a woman lustfully. Yeah, I haven't turned away from someone in need. But I can't say that about my life. But I have someone in Jesus who took my place. And when I deserve suffering and in punishment, he suffered for me. And so Jesus washed away the sin, washed away where I have fallen short. And he's given me himself and his righteousness. And he calls us to live in that righteousness and live it out. And I think about the armor of God when we can put on the helmet of salvation to guard our minds. And so we can look at this world instead of looking on others in lust or looking in greed or looking in judgment. We can look from the perspective of Christ because he has guarded our minds with the helmet of salvation. He has saved us from ourselves, from our sin, from that whole perspective. Saves us from looking at the world in selfish ways. Is there a way that you are struggling with that? Are you looking at the world with lustful eyes, with greed, with judgment, with selfishness? Jesus saves us from that, and he wants to save you from that today. It's something where we daily have to put on the armor of God to guard our minds so that when we look at this world, we see it from the perspective of God. I like to think of an extension in that helmet of salvation as being like these goggles and masks that come down to guard our eyes, to have our eyes be pure and free of greed, and then our mouths to speak purity and righteousness. And I'll talk a little bit more next time in my next video about the mouth, but for now it's the eyes. When we look at this world, do we see the world as God sees it, or do we see it from a selfish, worldly perspective? I hope that you read Job 31 for yourself and look at the different aspects of Job's life where he pleads his innocence and know that we are sinners and we need Jesus. He was fully innocent, fully perfect for us, and he saves us and guards us.